We're continuing on with our interval practice, working around this E interval, and that means that we're going to basically be building a Phrygian modal scale, which sounds a little bit abstract because you might be thinking, why are we looking at the Phrygian modal scale and whatnot? Because that's not the most common types of scales that we build. But the reason we want to do that is because I want to see it as it relates to the other modes, which will help me with my chord construction and to basically be able to visualize how we can go from different scales, scale to scale, visualizing it in different ways. So I'm going to scroll back up and do a quick recap in terms of what we're trying to be picking up here, remembering our general idea is I want to do some of the stuff that is more, I wouldn't call it boring, although people do some of this tedious work. I think it's interesting. I work on spreadsheets all the time to see how things basically move around on the spreadsheet, but it is a little bit more intensive on the mind and less what people think of as creativity and more basically just understanding the fretboard so that you can then build on the creativity. And I would recommend doing that when your mind is active and working, like 15 minutes a day, and you'll see a huge improvement on understanding this stuff. And if you can understand this stuff, then you can basically build on that and be more creative. So why are we looking at the Phrygian mode? Well, if we go up to the major scale, remember the major scale is our Rosetta Stone, our key. Everything that we're referring back to typically is the major scale in Western music, although it's just another mode, which would be from modal terminology called the Ionian mode. All of the other modes are just related to it. That's how we can pack it in our mind so that we can visualize it and pack in a lot of information in our mind. That information being the formula, the visualization, the structure of the major scale and all of the other modes, which allows us to pack in basically there's 12 notes in the musical alphabet, 12 major scales then times 7, right? Because there's 7 related modes, and we can kind of pack them all and relate them to each other, making it easier to basically memorize those items. So we're gonna learn it in the major C major, because that's typically an easy thing to do because the C major doesn't have any sharps and flats, which gives us a nice point of reference to see if we're made an error by hitting a sharp or a flat when we look at the scale. So we're looking not only at the C major, but the C major and related modes. I'm focusing on the middle of the guitar here so that when we do our interval practice, we can measure up and down the guitar. If I went from this A note, that would be a pentatonic, 5 notes. That would be 7 notes, all 7 notes that usually a lot of people learn to play from A to A, which means we'd basically be playing in the Aeolian. But if I started on the C and to C, I'd be playing in essence in the major. So these are all the notes that are in the C major scale and related modes. So what we want to do is then really kind of learn this major scale backwards and forwards and be able to see it from every point within the major scale so that it would be similar to if you were filing stuff in alphabetical order like I used to in a CPA office and whatnot. It's really embarrassing when you're sitting there singing the alphabet from A to whatever every time you need to file a folder because you don't know how to say the alphabet from the middle of it, which most people don't because they don't sing the alphabet from the middle of the alphabet, So what we would want to do is to be able to start from any point in the alphabet and be able to construct from that point, which makes us much more dynamic, much more easy flow, which allows us to then improvise and be more creative once we basically can understand that. If we can't get that, and I have to stop every time I have an idea so that I can re-say the alphabet from the beginning to wherever, to X or whatever, so that I can file a folder, that's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be tedious, it's going to be stressful. And so what we're trying to do is basically really learn this from each point. Now remember, a couple ways you can do that. You can learn the shapes, which I love doing as an Excel person because the fretboard is a spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet, people. It's a spreadsheet. We're learning how to move the shapes around the spreadsheet, and it's great. And so we could do that, and we could just improvise that way. And I don't really even know. I don't need to know what I'm really doing. I'd like to know the target notes, right? But I can play anything to some degree within, and I can build different chords. Well, I don't even know what the chord is, but but I can just make the chord in the shape, and I can be creative that way using my ear. I can also use the formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half would be from the major scale. But again, I'd like to learn that formula from every point in the scale, which would allow me then, once again, to start on any note and build the scale around it, which allows me a huge level of flexibility. And then I also want to be able to learn the intervals, meaning start at any particular note and build around that note by using an interval construction around the center point being what I'm measuring from. That's what we're doing this time, which is very useful, so that when I start building chords, instead of just like building chords and reaching whatever I can with my fingers but not knowing what I'm playing, I can start to analyze the chords and say, what are the intervals between the chords? So that's the idea. So if I looked at the Ionian or major scale, what are the intervals? We got a perfect first, we got a 2-note away major second, a 4-note away major third, a 5-note away perfect fourth, a 7-note away perfect fifth, a 9-note away major sixth, and an 11-note away major seven. I would like to now look at the Phrygian. That's the one we're on here, and I'm going to be looking at the E down here on the bottom of the guitar and measuring from that point. This is going to be really useful even if I'm playing in the major scale. Why? Because I want to build a chord in when I'm playing in C major, right? Or if I was playing in A minor, then when I get to the E note, I want to build a chord on the E note. Now I could just memorize that it's going to be a minor chord because I know that the related 2, 3, and 6 are minor chord constructions. That helps me to memorize the 1, 3, 5, a 3-note triad. But it doesn't help me to know what about the 7, 9, 11, and 13, the 9, 11, 13 being equivalent to the even numbers that we skipped in chord construction, the 2, 4, and 6. I can't really know that unless I know the modes, right? So even if I'm not playing in the key of Phrygian, which is still fun to do, you might want to do that. I still want to know this, because if I label this E as the Phrygian mode, that will help me to build a more complex chord even when I'm playing in one of the other modes, like a C major in this case, or an Aeolian. So that's basically the practical component of it in one practical component. So if I go down to the Phrygian, then we're going to be measuring from this component. If I look at the intervals for the Phrygian, I still have a perfect first. They all have a perfect first, but then I have a 1-note away minor second. This is the only one that has a 1-note away minor second. The major does not, and the Aeolian also does not, which is weird. You would think the Aeolian, which is the main minor scale, would have a flattened second, but it doesn't. So the Phrygian is like the Aeolian, except it has a flat second. If you want to convert from the Phrygian, which you might know in this case from the E Phrygian to the E minor, all I have to do is unflat the second, move it to the right of the guitar, right? So then I've got a 3-note away minor third, which is what we would expect on a minor scale, same as the Aeolian or minor scale. The major scale would have a 4-note away major third. The perfect fourth and perfect fifth are the same as the major and main minor scale, which is what we would typically expect. The sixth is an 8-note away minor 6 or flattened 6, which is what we would expect, same as the minor scale. But the major scale would have a 9-note away major 6, and we have a 10-note away minor 7, which is a flattened 7, which is what we would expect in a minor scale, same as the main minor scale, the major scale having an 11-note away major 7. Okay, so we're also on the bottom of the guitar. We're measuring from this E, which means we're going to be doing a lot of measuring up above it, which I would wager that many people don't do well. Okay, so if you know how to do this, you possibly know something that a lot of guitar players, depending on how they learned the guitar, a lot of guitar players don't have any idea how to measure something from the bottom as though it's the root to make inverted chords, which is really cool and useful, especially if you're in a band, because if you're the only one that knows how to do that, you can play in different registers that other people can't play in, which allows you to do something a little bit different than what everybody else is basically doing, and possibly be in a register that's not going to clash as much with a different instrument, like a heavier instrument, like say a bass or something like that, right? So that's what, and we also know that the fault line is going to be down here. And so we're going to measure from this E and build our intervals, remembering that an interval can be thought of as like a chord, almost a 2-note chord. You usually kind of think of a chord with at least 3 notes, but you can think of it as a 2-note kind of chord. And then when you have 3 notes, then all you're doing is saying, what are the intervals for the 3 notes? Remembering, though, that if you have 3 or more notes, you have to decide which note are you seeing as the root of the chord, because you can look at it from each perspective, just like in physics, right? If I was moving in a car and the other person was walking on the sidewalk, what would it look like from my perspective? In the car, it would look like the other guy's moving, but if I was on the sidewalk, it looks like the car's moving. Which one is correct? Well, it depends on your, right? You get that kind of argument happening. Same thing here. If we want to see the chords, I want to be able to switch my mind to each side of the chord, looking at the inverse chord. Why? Because again, if I'm trying to be creative, then I might be getting to this E, and I might be playing something that would be a different chord, but I'm looking at it from perspective of the E, because that's the chord I'm on, right? So instead of making a simple triad that's always going to be the 1, 3, 5, I might make more of an exotic chord, but I'm going to look at it from the perspective of the E and see if that fits into what I'm doing, right? Even though it might, from a different perspective, it might be a D chord of some kind, right? Or something like that, just because I had a D in it. You know, we might more commonly call it a D chord, but no, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the E because that's what I'm on in my progression. Okay, so that's enough for the rant for the intro.